Have you ever heard the words "you're worthless" come from the very person you gave life to, raised and sacrificed your best years for? The sting of that betrayal is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. And what happened next in my life, well, I'll let you be the judge of it. Before I begin, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Her Revenge Stories, so you never miss a story like this again. And please let me know in the comments below, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? I love hearing from you all. Especially because many of you know exactly what it feels like when family doesn't value you anymore. My name is Margaret. I'm 55 years old, and I live in a small suburban neighborhood in Ohio. I never imagined my story would end up being one that people all over the country could relate to. But here I am, telling you about the most painful day of my life, and how the kindness of strangers turned into something I never expected. I raised my only daughter, Emily, practically on my own. Her father left us when she was still in diapers, and while it wasn't easy, I always told myself that if I poured everything into Emily, my time, my energy, my love, then someday she would understand and appreciate the sacrifices I made. For decades, I worked 2 jobs. I skipped new clothes for myself, vacations, even doctor visits, just so she could have the best. I thought I was building a bond with her that nothing could break. But bonds, I learned, aren't always as strong as we think. The day started like any other. The sun was bright, spilling across my small living room where I sat in the old armchair I've had for years. The fabric is worn, the color faded, but it's comfortable. Emily had promised to stop by around noon to talk about something important. That word important had been ringing in my head all morning. I thought maybe she wanted advice about her marriage. She and her husband, Brian, had been arguing a lot lately. Or maybe she wanted to tell me about a new job opportunity. I put on a pot of coffee and waited, fussing with the pillows on the couch like she was a guest and not my own daughter. That's the thing about mothers, we never stop wanting to make things nice for our children, no matter how old they get. When Emily arrived, she barely said hello. She looked polished in her crisp blouse and tailored pants, her hair done perfectly, and her nails freshly manicured. She didn't sit down right away, just stood there with her arms crossed, like she had come prepared for a fight. "Mom," she said flatly, "we need to talk about your future." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. My future? I'm only 55, not 85. I still take care of myself. I'm still capable of cooking, cleaning, paying bills. I tilted my head, confused, and gestured for her to sit down. "What do you mean, my future?" I asked gently. She sighed like she was already exhausted from dealing with me. "Mom, you can't keep living like this. The house is too much for you. You don't have a retirement plan. You barely make enough from your part-time job at the library to keep the lights on. Brian and I have been talking, and we think it's time you consider other options." My chest tightened. Other options? Emily, this is my home. I've lived here for almost 30 years. It's not too much for me. I manage just fine. She rolled her eyes, that dismissive little gesture that cuts deeper than words. "You're not hearing me. You're not really contributing anymore. You don't have money to help us when we need it. You're not helping with the kids because you're always tired. Honestly, Mom, you're becoming a burden." The word burden echoed in my ears like a cruel bell. A burden? After everything I gave her? After all the nights I went hungry so she could eat? I tried to steady my voice, but it cracked anyway. "Emily, I don't understand. Thought family. I thought we took care of each other." Her arms dropped to her sides and she finally looked at me, her eyes cold and unrecognizable. "Mom, you're worthless now. You can't give me anything. You're holding on to this old house like it's worth something, but it's falling apart. You should sell it and move into some kind of assisted place before things get worse. Brian says we can't keep stepping in to fix your problems." Those words, "you're worthless now," sliced through me like a knife. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her remember every sacrifice I made, but all I could do was stare. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Is that really how you see me? Worthless?" She didn't answer right away. She picked up her purse, adjusted the strap on her shoulder and said, "It's just the truth. You should think about it." Then she turned and walked out of my house, leaving the door slightly open behind her. I sat there, the sound of her car pulling away echoing in my ears. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst. I couldn't move. I couldn't even cry yet. I just sat there frozen, trying to process the reality that my daughter, the little girl I once carried on my hip, the teenager I stayed up nights worrying about, had just told me I was worthless. When the tears finally came, they came hard. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed until my body shook. I didn't even hear the knock at the door at first. It wasn't until I heard it a second time that I lifted my head, my face blotchy and wet. I shuffled to the door, half expecting Emily had come back, maybe to apologize. But when I opened it, I found my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, standing there with a concerned look on her face. She's in her 60s, a kind woman who always brings me cookies at Christmas. "Margaret," she said softly, "are you all right?" I saw Emily leaving and she looked well upset. And then I thought I heard crying. I tried to put on a brave face, but the tears betrayed me. My lips trembled, and before I could stop myself, the truth spilled out. She told me I'm worthless. My own daughter. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, and she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me in a warm maternal hug. "Oh, honey. No one who raised a child alone, who worked as hard as you did, is worthless. Don't you ever believe that." That hug, from a woman who wasn't related to me by blood, felt more comforting than anything Emily had said to me in years. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of something besides pain. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the beginning of realizing that family isn't always who you share DNA with. Sometimes, family is who shows up when you're broken. Mrs. Thompson stayed with me for a while, making tea in my kitchen as if it were her own. She listened without judgment as I poured out the whole story, from the moment Emily walked in to the moment she left. When I was finished, she patted my hand and said, "Don't you worry, Margaret. You're not alone in this. We're your neighbors, and we're not going to let you be treated that way." Her words were kind, but I couldn't help feeling the ache in my chest. I didn't know then how much those neighbors would really step in, or how their actions would change everything. But at that moment, sitting across from Mrs. Thompson at my little kitchen table, I realized one thing. Maybe Emily saw me as worthless, but not everyone did. And that, at least, gave me the strength to face the rest of the day. After Mrs. Thompson left, I sat for a long while at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea she had made me. The steam had already faded, and the tea had gone lukewarm, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My mind was spinning in circles, replaying Emily's words over and over again like a cruel record. "You're worthless now." It was astonishing how 4 little words could feel like a bulldozer crushing decades of sacrifice, love, and memories. I remembered the times I held Emily when she was sick, the hours I spent sewing Halloween costumes I couldn't afford to buy, the nights I walked home from the diner in the freezing cold, just so she could have new shoes for school. Every little memory piled on top of me like bricks, heavy and suffocating. I thought of calling her, trying to reason with her, but my pride stopped me. Pride and pain are strange partners. They both pull you into silence when your heart screams for answers. Instead, I just sat, listening to the house creak around me. This home had been my anchor for decades, a place of warmth, laughter, and countless memories. Now it felt like the walls themselves were judging me, whispering that Emily was right. As the hours passed, I tried distracting myself with chores. I wiped the counters even though they were already clean. I folded and refolded the same blanket draped over the couch. I even reorganized the mail on the counter, pretending that tidiness could fix the mess inside my chest. But none of it worked. The ache clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Around 3 o'clock, another knock came at the door. I hesitated this time, my heart racing. I almost didn't answer, afraid it might be Emily coming back with more harsh words. But when I opened the door, it was another neighbor, Mr. Green from across the street. He's a retired firefighter, tall and sturdy even in his 70s, with kind blue eyes and a voice that carries authority without harshness. "Margaret," he said, tipping his cap. "I just came to check on you. Sarah said Emily came by earlier, and well, she thought maybe things didn't go too well." I swallowed hard, trying not to let the tears rise again. She said some things," I admitted, my voice low. Mr. Green stepped inside without hesitation, like a man on a mission. Sit down, Margaret. Let me guess, she was talking about money, wasn't she? About you selling this place. I nodded slowly. She said I was worthless, that I wasn't contributing, that this house is falling apart, and I should just give it up. His jaw tightened. Worthless? That's nonsense. I've watched you for years, mowing your lawn, fixing things around here, working at the library. You're not worthless. You're one of the hardest working people I know. Hearing those words felt like a balm on an open wound. I blinked back the tears that threatened to spill and whispered, "Thank you. I needed to hear that." Mr. Green leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with compassion. "Margaret, kids these days don't always understand what it means to struggle. They don't remember what we went through in the 70s and 80s, raising families without all the luxuries they have now. They forget the sweat and sacrifice it took just to keep food on the table. But your worth isn't tied to money. It never was." I wanted to believe him. Deep down, a part of me knew he was right. But Emily's words still gnawed at me, echoing in the corners of my mind. After he left, promising that he and his wife Sarah would stop by later with dinner, I found myself drifting into the living room, staring at old photo albums stacked on the shelf. I pulled one down, flipping through the pages of Emily's childhood. There she was at 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning while holding a balloon at the county fair. Another picture showed her on her high school graduation day, her arms slung around me as if we were inseparable. I touched the photos with trembling fingers, as if by some miracle the paper could reassure me that those days were real, that I hadn't imagined the closeness we once had. But now, looking at her polished, distant face earlier that day, I wondered, when had she changed? Was it gradual, the way cracks form in a foundation until one day the house leans? Or was it sharp, like the snap of a tree branch in a storm? Had I missed the warning signs while clinging to the belief that my sacrifices meant something to her? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice dusk creeping in. The golden light from the setting sun spilled across the floor, painting the room in warmth I didn't feel. I turned on the lamp and sat back down in my armchair, the one place in the house where I felt somewhat grounded. The quiet of the evening pressed in on me, but it was broken by another knock at the door. This time when I opened it, Mrs. Thompson was there again, this time holding a casserole dish covered in foil. "I thought you might not feel like cooking tonight," she said softly. I almost broke down crying again, overwhelmed by her kindness. "Thank you, Sarah. You didn't have to." She smiled gently. "Yes, I did. That's what neighbors are for." She stepped inside, placing the casserole on the counter, then pulled out 2 plates from my cabinet as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Soon we were both sitting at the table again, steam rising from the food between us. As we ate, she began sharing stories of her own children. "You know," she said, her fork poised in the air, "one of my sons once told me I was old-fashioned and didn't understand his world anymore. It hurt. A lot. But I learned something. Sometimes our kids don't see us as whole people. They see us only in relation to what we can give them. It's selfish, yes, but it's also short-sighted." I nodded slowly, taking in her words. "So what do I do? Just accept it? Accept that she sees me this way?" Mrs. Thompson shook her head firmly. "No. You don't accept it. You keep living your life. You find your worth in your own 2 hands, your own choices. And you surround yourself with people who see you for who you are." Her words sank deep into me, planting seeds I didn't yet know would grow. At that moment, I just felt grateful not to be alone. Later that night, after she left and I washed the dishes, I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the quiet street. The houses were all lit up, some families gathering for dinner, others watching TV in their living rooms. For the first time, I wondered if maybe my family wasn't just limited to blood. Maybe family was also the people across the street, the ones who knocked on my door, who cooked me meals, who told me I mattered when my own daughter said I didn't. I climbed into bed that night with a heavy heart, but also with the faintest spark of something else, resilience. Emily's words still echoed in my head, but now they weren't the only ones. Mrs. Thompson's gentle voice and Mr. Green's firm reassurance played alongside them, creating a new melody, one that whispered, "You are not worthless. You are not alone." And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized this day wasn't just about what Emily had taken from me. It was also about what my neighbors had given me back. A sense that I still had value, still had dignity, still had a place in this world. I didn't know then just how far their support would go, or how much it would mean in the days to come. But as I closed my eyes, exhausted from the emotional storm, I knew one thing for certain. Emily was wrong about me. And one day she would realize it too. The morning light slipped through my curtains, painting faint golden streaks across the wall. I lay there for a long while, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Usually mornings brought a sense of routine. Making coffee, watering the plants, straightening up the living room. But that day I just felt heavy. Emily's words still pressed down on me, though the kindness of my neighbors had softened the blow a little. I eventually pushed myself out of bed and shuffled to the kitchen. The casserole Sarah had brought the night before still sat in the fridge. I cut myself a small slice, reheated it, and made a pot of coffee. As the scent filled the kitchen, I found myself remembering the mornings when Emily was a little girl. She used to sit at this very table, swinging her legs, asking endless questions about the world. She was so curious then, so eager to learn. Back then, I never could have imagined that same girl growing up to look me in the eye and call me worthless. The coffee tasted bitter that morning, though I hadn't brewed it any differently. Maybe bitterness lingers in the heart and seeps into everything else. I tried to keep busy with chores, folding laundry and dusting shelves, but it was hard to shake the restless feeling inside me. Around mid-morning I heard voices outside. Peeking through the window, I saw Mr. Green chatting with another neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, near the mailbox. They glanced at my house and for a moment, I felt a pang of self-consciousness. Were they talking about me? About Emily's visit? Not long after, there was another knock on my door. This time it was Mrs. Alvarez herself, holding a basket of muffins. She smiled warmly. "I baked too many this morning. Thought you might like some." I hesitated before opening the door fully. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she replied. "Besides, I heard Emily stopped by yesterday. I know how daughters can be." Her words were gentle, not prying, but they struck a chord. I accepted the muffins and invited her in. As she sat at the table, she began to share stories about her own children. "My son stopped talking to me for 3 years after his father passed," she said matter-of-factly. "He blamed me for things that weren't even my fault. Sometimes, Margaret, our kids hurt us because they don't know where else to put their anger. It doesn't make it right, but it happens more often than we admit." I listened, nodding slowly, feeling both comforted and saddened by her words. It was strange, in a way, how neighbors I hadn't spoken deeply with in years suddenly became lifelines. Maybe it was because they saw me at my lowest, stripped of any facade, and chose to step in rather than step back. After she left, I carried the muffins to the counter, unwrapped one, and took a bite. It was warm, soft, and sweet, almost enough to make me forget the bitterness still lingering inside. Later in the afternoon, I decided to step outside for a bit. I walked slowly down the street, the cool air brushing against my skin. The neighborhood looked ordinary, kids riding bikes, someone mowing their lawn, a dog barking in the distance. But I felt different, like a veil had been lifted, showing me which connections truly mattered. As I passed by, Mr. Green waved from his porch. "Heading out for a walk, Margaret?" "Just trying to clear my head," I called back. "Good for you," he said. "Don't let anyone steal your peace." Those words echoed in me as I continued down the street. Don't let anyone steal your peace. It was simple advice, yet it felt powerful. I didn't go far, just a few blocks, but the movement helped. By the time I returned home, I felt steadier, more grounded. I made myself another cup of coffee and settled into the armchair with the book. Reading had always been my refuge, a way to escape into other worlds when my own felt too heavy. But even as I turned the pages, my thoughts drifted back to Emily. I wondered if she felt justified in what she said. I wondered if she regretted it at all. Part of me hoped she would call, apologize, admit she was wrong. But another part of me knew that might not happen anytime soon. As evening fell, Sarah stopped by again, this time with her husband. They brought a deck of cards and insisted on playing a few rounds at my table. The laughter that filled the room was a balm I hadn't realized I needed. For a little while, the heaviness lifted, replaced by something lighter, warmer. After they left, I tidied up the kitchen, placing the cards neatly on the counter where they'd left them. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty table. It struck me how different the house felt with others in it. How much lighter, how much more alive. Climbing into bed that night, I reflected on the day. Emily's words still hurt, but the pain was no longer the only thing I felt. Alongside it was gratitude, for Sarah, for Mr. Green, for Mrs. Alvarez. For the neighbors who had stepped in when my own daughter had stepped away. It was strange to admit, but maybe, just maybe, there was something healing about being reminded that worth isn't defined by the opinions of one person, even if that person is your child. Worth is reflected in how others see you, in the kindness they show, in the ways they remind you that you still matter. As I closed my eyes, I thought of something Mrs. Alvarez had said, that sometimes kids lash out because they don't know where else to place their pain. Maybe Emily's words weren't truly about me. Maybe they were about her own struggles, her own fears. That didn't excuse them, but it did remind me of one truth. I couldn't let her bitterness erase my value. With that thought, I drifted into sleep, holding on to the fragile but growing belief that no matter what Emily thought, I was not worthless. And though I didn't yet know it, the neighbors' kindness that day was only the beginning. Their role in my life was about to grow even bigger, in ways none of us could have predicted. The sunlight the next day filtered in through my curtains, gentle but persistent, as if reminding me that life moves forward whether I feel ready or not. I sat up in bed, my joints aching a little more than usual, and lingered in the quiet. For a while I just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the faint chirping of birds outside. Before I started the day, I thought about all of you watching this story. If you haven't yet, please make sure to subscribe to my channel Her Revenge Stories. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. It always warms my heart to know I'm not alone, that someone out there is listening. With that, I rose, slipped into a cardigan, and padded to the kitchen. The muffins Mrs. Alvarez had given me sat neatly covered on the counter. I placed one on a small plate, poured myself some coffee, and sat by the window. From there I could see the neighborhood waking up. Mr. Green watering his garden, Sarah jogging past with her headphones in, a few kids waiting for the school bus. It felt comforting, seeing life move in its rhythms. But beneath that comfort was still a hollow ache. Emily's words clung to me. I kept replaying them in my head, wondering if I had failed her somehow, wondering if maybe I had unknowingly become a burden. But then I remembered the kindness from the night before. The card games, the laughter, the warmth. Those moments told a different story. After breakfast, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, filled with the faint scent of freshly cut grass. As I walked down the path toward the mailbox, Sarah waved from across the street. She jogged over, her cheeks flushed from exercise. "Morning, Margaret," she said cheerfully. "How are you holding up?" I forced a small smile. "I'm managing. Trying to, at least." She touched my arm gently. "That's all you can do. You don't have to pretend with us, you know. If you need company, or help with errands, just ask." Her words were simple, but they warmed me deeply. I realized how much I'd spent the last few years keeping to myself, not wanting to trouble anyone, not wanting to seem needy. Yet here were these neighbors showing up without being asked, making sure I knew I mattered. After Sarah jogged away, I walked a little further down the street, just to stretch my legs. I passed Mrs. Alvarez's house and noticed her sitting on the porch with a knitting project in her lap. She looked up, smiled, and waved me over. "Come sit for a while," she said. I joined her, and soon we were talking about simple things, the weather, the flowers in her yard, the latest news about the community center. But as the conversation went on, she grew more serious. "You know, Margaret," she said, "people think neighbors don't matter as much these days. Everyone's too busy, too wrapped up in their own lives. But when families falter, neighbors are sometimes the ones who step in. Don't ever think you're alone." Her words hit me in a tender place. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Later that afternoon, Mr. Green stopped by with a few groceries. "Picked up a little extra at the store," he said, placing the bags on my counter. Figured you could use them. I protested, insisting he didn't have to, but he waved me off. Nonsense. Neighbors look out for each other. You'd do the same for me. The rest of the day unfolded in a quiet rhythm. I read for a while, tended to my small garden, and tried not to dwell too much on Emily's absence. Still, it was impossible to ignore the silence where her voice should have been. I wondered if she even thought about me, if she regretted what she'd said, or if she had moved on without a second thought. As evening came, I found myself sitting outside on my porch, watching the sun sink below the rooftops. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the faint sounds of laughter from down the street where children played. And for the first time in a while, I felt a kind of peace settle over me. Not because everything was okay, it wasn't, but because I realized I wasn't invisible. The neighbors had made that clear. They had stepped into the emptiness Emily left behind, not to replace her, but to remind me that I wasn't worthless, that I was still part of something bigger than myself. As darkness settled in, I went inside, made a simple supper, and sat down at the table. The quiet was still there, but it didn't feel as suffocating. I thought about what Mrs. Alvarez had said, that when families falter, neighbors step in. Maybe that was the truth of my life now. Maybe the family I thought I had wasn't the one I could lean on anymore. Maybe my circle had changed, but it hadn't disappeared. When I finally went to bed, I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about Emily. I couldn't deny the pain she'd caused, but I also couldn't deny the strange sense of strength I'd begun to feel, thanks to the people around me. I drifted into sleep with one final thought. Sometimes the love we expect from family shows up instead from the people living right next door. And though it doesn't erase the hurt, it builds something new. A reminder that even when our children turn away, we are not truly alone. The morning began with the soft patter of rain against the windows. I lay in bed for a few moments, listening to the steady rhythm. It was soothing, almost like the house itself was breathing with me. For a long time, rain used to feel lonely, like a reminder of the quiet inside these walls. But after the kindness of my neighbors in the last few days, it didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. Before I continue, let me pause for a moment. If you're here listening, please subscribe to my channel Her Revenge Stories, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? It always makes me smile to know I'm sharing this story with people from all over. I pulled on my sweater and shuffled to the kitchen. The rain had cooled the air, and the house felt chilly. As I poured a cup of coffee, I noticed a small note slipped under my door. I bent to pick it up, curious. In neat handwriting it read, "Stop by when you're ready. I made soup. Mrs. Alvarez." A warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. These little gestures, one after another, were like stitches repairing something torn inside me. I spent some of the morning tidying up the living room. Emily used to tease me about keeping too many books stacked everywhere. She'd laugh and say, "Mom, you don't need all these, get rid of them." I never could. They were like old friends, waiting patiently whenever I needed them. Today, I dusted their spines carefully, whispering the titles as if greeting them one by one. By late morning, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I grabbed an umbrella and walked over to Mrs. Alvarez's house. She greeted me at the door with that same bright smile, ushering me into her kitchen where a pot of soup simmered on the stove. Sit," she insisted, pulling out a chair. The smell of chicken and vegetables filled the room, wrapping me in comfort. We ate together quietly at first, then slipped into conversation about our lives, our families. She told me about her son who lived in Texas, how he called often but couldn't visit much because of his work. I nodded, feeling a pang of recognition. Children grown and busy, lives moving on while we sat in houses that once held laughter and noise but now echoed with silence. When I told her about Emily's words, the sting of being called worthless, her eyes softened. "Margaret," she said gently, "worth isn't something our children get to decide for us. It comes from who we are, from the lives we've lived, the people we've touched. You've raised her, loved her, given her everything. That doesn't disappear just because she's too blind to see it." I swallowed hard. Hearing it from her, spoken so firmly, steadied something in me. After lunch, I helped her wash the dishes. She chatted the whole time, telling me stories about when her children were young, and for a little while it felt like we were two mothers side by side, remembering a life stage we had both lived fully. Later, as I walked home, I passed Mr. Green's garden. He was out in the damp soil, pulling weeds. He looked up and waved me over. "Ground soft after the rain, perfect for planting," he said, holding up a packet of seeds. Before I knew it, I was kneeling beside him, hands in the earth, planting marigolds along the edge of his walkway. The smell of the soil clung to my fingers, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. He chuckled at my crooked rows, teasing that they had character. It struck me then how healing these ordinary moments were. Soup in a neighbor's kitchen, dirt under my nails in a garden, laughter at something as small as uneven flowers. They weren't grand gestures. They were simple, human, and real. And they reminded me that life wasn't just about the big heartbreaks. It was also about the small kindnesses that stitched those heartbreaks back together. That evening I returned home, made myself some tea, and sat in my favorite chair by the window. I thought about Emily. I wondered if she ever sat in her own home and thought about me. If she remembered all the times I stayed up late helping her with homework, or the nights I worked extra shifts so she could have what she needed. Did those memories mean nothing to her now? The ache of that question lingered. But as I sipped my tea, I also thought about today, about soup, stories, soil, and laughter. Maybe Emily couldn't see my worth, but my neighbors did. And slowly, I was starting to see it again too. The rain picked up again as night fell, drumming steady against the roof. I pulled a blanket over myself and let the sound lull me. In the quiet, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise, "I am not worthless. I never was." And with that thought, I drifted into sleep, the storm outside echoing the storm inside me, but softer now, gentler, and somehow less lonely. The sun filtered through the curtains when I opened my eyes. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the world outside washed clean. Birds chirped from the trees, their songs spilling through the window, and for a moment, I just lay there listening. There was something hopeful about the morning air, something that told me it might be a day worth remembering. Before I begin, let me say this. If you're here listening to my story, please subscribe to my channel Her Revenge Stories. It means the world to me, and I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Tell me in the comments below. I sat up, stretched my arms, and decided to treat myself to something simple but special. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, scrambled eggs, and toasted bread. I even cut up an apple and set it neatly on a plate. Sitting at the table, I looked at the little meal in front of me and smiled. For years, I'd prepared breakfast for Emily, rushing to make sure she had something before school or later before her long work days. I always ate standing at the counter, never really sitting down. This morning it felt good to sit, to savor, to make myself the priority for once. As I ate, I thought about what Mrs. Alvarez had said yesterday, that worth wasn't something Emily could decide for me. I carried those words with me like armor. They steadied me, reminded me that I had lived a life full of effort, sacrifice, and love. Even if Emily failed to see it, I knew it was there. Later that morning, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, I found Mr. Green standing there with a small box of seedlings in his hands. "Morning, Margaret," he said cheerfully. "Thought you might like to try planting some of your own. You did good work in my garden yesterday." His kindness caught me off guard. I accepted the box, thanking him, and we walked out to my little yard together. The earth was still damp from the rain, soft and ready. We knelt side by side, planting the seedlings into neat rows. I asked him about his late wife, and he spoke of her with such tenderness, it made my heart ache in a bittersweet way. "You know," he said, patting the soil over one of the plants, "when she passed, I thought I'd never feel useful again. The house was too quiet, and I just drifted through the days. But the garden saved me. These plants need me. They remind me there's still life worth tending." I looked down at the seedlings in my hands and understood exactly what he meant. When we finished, he stood, brushed off his knees, and said, "These will need care, Margaret. You'll have to water them, check on them every day. They'll give you something to look forward to." I promised I would, and as he left, I felt a sense of purpose settle into me. These tiny green shoots were fragile, but with care they would grow strong. Maybe in some way they were a mirror of me. The afternoon stretched on quietly. I decided to walk to the library, a place I hadn't visited in months. As I wandered the aisles, the smell of old paper and ink filled me with nostalgia. I picked out a book of short stories and settled into a corner chair. Reading had always been my escape, but today it felt different. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had let slip away. On the way home, I stopped at the bakery and bought a small loaf of fresh bread. The young woman behind the counter handed it to me with a smile. "This just came out of the oven. Still warm," she said. It was such a small exchange, but even that simple kindness brightened my day. Back home, I set the bread on the counter and made myself a cup of tea. As I sipped it, I thought of Emily again. I couldn't help it. My mind wandered back to the words she had thrown at me. "You're worthless now." They echoed in my head, sharp and cruel. But then, like a bomb, I remembered the faces of Mrs. Alvarez, Mr. Green, the librarian, the girl at the bakery. Each of them had treated me with respect, with dignity. And it hit me, sometimes family isn't the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the ones who show up when you're at your lowest, the ones who offer soup, laughter, seedlings, or even just a smile across a counter. Evening came and I carried the new book out to the porch. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and orange, the air cool but pleasant. I read until the light faded, and when I could no longer see the words on the page, I closed the book and simply watched the horizon. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something, waiting for Emily to call, waiting for her to apologize, waiting for life to feel meaningful again. Tonight the meaning was here. It was in the pages of my book, the soil under my nails, the warmth of bread still fresh from the oven. When the stars began to appear, I whispered softly to myself, "I am still here. I still matter." And with that thought I went inside, made myself a light dinner, and settled into bed. My heart still carried scars, yes, but it also carried hope. And that hope was enough to carry me into tomorrow. The morning light was soft when I awoke, painting the room in a gentle glow. I stretched, listening to the faint hum of life outside, the sound of a lawnmower down the street, children calling to each other, birds chattering in the trees. For a long time mornings had felt heavy to me, filled with loneliness. But today there was something different in the air, something lighter. Before I begin, let me pause here. Please subscribe to my channel Her Revenge Stories. And in the comments tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love knowing where these stories are reaching. I rose slowly, slipped into my robe, and went to check on the seedlings Mr. Green had helped me plant. Kneeling beside them, I brushed my fingers lightly across the damp leaves. They were small still, but there was undeniable life in them, a stubbornness that mirrored the feeling beginning to stir inside me. After breakfast, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. I passed Mrs. Alvarez's house and she waved from her porch. "Coffee later?" she called out. I promised I'd stop by in the afternoon. Further down the street, I spotted Mr. Green tending to his roses. He tipped his hat and said, "Your seedlings are looking good, Margaret. Keep at it, they'll thrive under your care." His words warmed me, a reminder that I wasn't invisible here, not to the people who mattered. But as I turned the corner, my thoughts drifted inevitably back to Emily. Her face, her voice, the harshness of her words. "You're worthless now." It wasn't easy to silence that echo. Even with the kindness around me, it lingered, a bruise that hadn't faded. I sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree and let myself think about her. About all the years I had poured into raising her, the sacrifices, the love. I wondered if she ever looked back and saw those years, or if she had buried them under her own ambitions and resentments. But as the breeze rustled through the leaves, another thought came to me. Maybe it wasn't about whether Emily remembered. Maybe it was about me remembering. About me holding on to the truth of who I was, regardless of whether she acknowledged it. When I returned home, I brewed a pot of tea and carried a cup over to Mrs. Alvarez's porch. She was waiting with a plate of cookies, and we sat together talking about everything and nothing. At one point she looked at me and said, "You know, Margaret, life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the people we think will stand by us don't, but then others, people we never expected, step in and remind us we're not alone. Her words stayed with me. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat in my chair by the window and let the quiet of the house settle around me. It wasn't the silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of peace. I thought again about Emily. I didn't know what the future held for us. Maybe she would never apologize. Maybe she would. But I realized I couldn't build my worth on that hope. I had to build it on something sturdier, on myself, on the kindness of neighbors, on the small joys that each day still held. As night fell, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky above was a canvas of stars, endless and bright. I breathed deeply, the cool air filling my lungs, and I whispered aloud as if declaring it to the universe. I am not worthless. I never was. And I never will be. The words felt strong, final, and freeing. And in that moment, with the stars above me and the quiet world around me, I knew the truth. My story wasn't ending here. It was only just beginning.